It was just a single, careless string of words. One sentence, tossed into the air without a thought. But a sentence like that can be enough to push a person into a loneliness so deep, it feels like it has no bottom. Your life, now that you're old, it's basically garbage. Those were the words my daughter-in-law spoke to me. It happened one evening, after my grandson's birthday party. The house had gone quiet, and I was on my hands and knees, wiping a sticky spill from the kitchen floor. For my entire life, I had believed in a simple truth. If I lived with kindness, with humility, with patience, then one day, my children would understand. They would see the love I had poured into them. But I was wrong, and in that moment, when I gently placed the old, worn savings passbook on the dining room table, the one showing a balance of over $1 million, the house fell so silent, it was as if no one had ever lived there at all. This isn't just my story. It might be your story too. Or perhaps it's the story of your own mother, the one who still stands silently in the kitchen, working long after everyone else has finished their meal. My name is Eleanor Vance. I was born in 1949 in a small town nestled deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. It was the kind of place where the dogwood trees exploded in a riot of white blossoms every spring, and the winter winds brought a chill that settled deep in your bones. There was nothing special about my childhood. My father passed away from a lung sickness when I was young, leaving my mother to raise me and my two sisters all on her own. To make ends meet, she took in mending work from a fine tailor shop in the town's main street, her fingers always busy with a needle and thread. Growing up in the lean years after the war, I learned a hard lesson very early on. Having enough food on the table was a blessing. Having anything extra, any kind of comfort, well, that was a dream you didn't dare to have. After I finished middle school, there was no talk of high school or college. At 17, I started working at the local textile mill. 2 years later, I met a young man named Robert Vance. He was a cab driver who delivered parts and supplies to the mill. He used to say the kindest things. "Your smile," he told me once, "is like a patch of sunshine on a crisp autumn day." I felt my face grow hot, and I looked away. But I remember my heart felt warm for the rest of that day. We were married when I was 22. There was no big ceremony, no white dress. We just had a small dinner with my mother, his mother, and a few neighbors. Life wasn't easy, but we loved each other with everything we had. As long as we had that love, a roof over our heads, and food to eat, that, to us, was happiness. When I was 24, I gave birth to our son, Michael. There was a terrible thunderstorm that night. Robert waited for hours under the hospital awning, getting soaked to the bone. I can still see him so clearly, standing there when the nurse finally let him in, a huge grin on his face as he wiped away tears at the sound of our baby's first cry. Money was always tight, but our days were peaceful. I stayed home to raise Michael, sometimes knitting sweaters for a little extra cash, while Robert drove his cab day and night. "I want our boy to get a proper education," he'd say, his eyes tired but full of determination. On every payday, he would divide his earnings into 3 neat piles. The first was for our living expenses, the second went straight into our savings account, and a third was always for a small gift for me. It was never anything fancy, sometimes a wildflower he picked from the side of the road, or a warm glazed donut from the town bakery. I often thought to myself, I don't need anything more than this. This is enough. But then, in the autumn of my 55th year, the gears of my life suddenly lurched, groaned, and broke apart. It was a phone call from the police one evening. "Ma'am, your husband collapsed while driving. He's passed away." He had suffered a massive heart attack right there in his cab. He was gone before he could say a single word. He never had the chance to say goodbye. I was numb. I couldn't think. I couldn't feel. All I could hear was the dry, rustling sound of dead leaves skittering across our front porch in the wind. After the funeral, I looked at Michael, who was a sophomore in college, and a new resolve hardened inside me. I cannot fall apart, I told myself. I have to be strong for him. I sold off half of the small plot of land my parents had left me, and used the money to open a little sundry shop in a room I built onto the front of our house. My life became a simple, grueling routine. I'd wake up at 5 every morning to make sandwiches to sell, open the shop, take a short nap in the afternoon, and then stand behind the register until late. I never went out with friends. I never bought anything for myself. Every single dollar I earned from selling a pack of instant noodles or a carton of milk was carefully saved. I would smooth out each bill and quietly deposit it into my savings passbook. "Eleanor, you're doing such a good job all on your own," some of the neighbors would say, but only I knew the truth. Only I knew that every night, after I'd locked the shop and turned off the lights, I would turn my face to the wall and cry without making a sound. I missed my husband so much it was a physical ache. My body was tired from the long hours. And more than anything, I was so lonely, it felt like I was suffocating. But I never, not once, let Michael see me cry. I wanted him to believe that his mother was strong, that no matter what happened, he could always count on me to be his rock. On the day he graduated from college, I gave him two things: an inexpensive wristwatch and a handwritten letter. The letter said, "Live a kind life, Michael. That's all your mother wants. That alone will make me happy." I will never forget the look in his eyes, wet with tears, as he read my words. The years passed. Michael got a good job, married, and moved to a suburb outside New York City. I stayed behind in our little house in Virginia, running my shop and living a quiet life by myself. He sent me a little money every month, but I rarely touched it. I put that away too. Money, I had come to believe, is a tool for freedom. Then one day, when I was 72, I fainted in the shop from a bout of anemia. Michael was worried sick. "Mom," he said over the phone, his voice tight with concern. "That's it. You can't live alone anymore. Please come live with us." My heart swelled with a feeling I hadn't felt in years. Finally, I thought, the day has come. I can finally live peacefully with my family. And so, I moved to New York. I packed only a few precious keepsakes and my old, dented tin cookie box. Tucked safely inside was the savings passbook I had been filling for over 30 years. The new house was a beautiful, two-story home, full of light. Michael and his wife, Jessica, met me at the door. My grandson ran up and threw his arms around my legs. "Grandma," he said, looking up at me with big, bright eyes, "you're going to live with us forever." Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded. This is it, I thought, a deep sense of peace settling over me. This is the beginning of a quiet, gentle old age. I truly believed it. But I never, ever could have imagined that inside that beautiful house, I was about to become nothing more than an outdated, inconvenient burden. In the first few weeks after I moved in, I felt a profound sense of relief. The little shop was gone. And with it, the constant smell of cheap cleaning supplies and the endless work. That corner of my world, which had been my entire life for so long, was no more. Still, I told myself, it's about time you got some rest, Eleanor. Having your son and grandson close by, isn't that more than enough to be happy? My daughter-in-law's name is Jessica. On the surface, she was perfectly pleasant. She greeted me properly each morning and set a lovely dinner table. She always called me Mrs. Vance. Her voice tinged with a polite, formal respect. That small gesture alone was enough to warm my heart. I had carried a secret fear with me, a silly old notion that daughters-in-law could be difficult and cruel. Perhaps I had been wrong all along, I thought. They gave me a small room on the first floor. It used to be Michael's home office. It was clean and had a nice window that looked out onto the backyard. I brought in a small tea table and a little bookshelf, and I taped a few old photographs to the wall. I wanted to make it my own space, a little sanctuary where I wouldn't be in anyone's way. I continued my lifelong habit of keeping a daily ledger. I wasn't running a business anymore, but I still wrote down every penny I spent. A bag of candy for my grandson, a bottle of shampoo, a bus ticket. Every month, I would quietly give Jessica $250 for household expenses. She would take the cash without a word, just a simple, silent nod. I thought that was enough. I thought everything was fine. But then, a series of small incidents began to change everything, quietly but surely. It started on the last day of the month. I had planned to walk to the bank to withdraw some cash for my monthly expenses, but a heavy downpour started in the morning and refused to let up. I decided to wait a day. That evening, Jessica stood at the door of my room. She didn't knock, just stood there in the frame, her arms crossed, her brow furrowed just slightly. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice flat, "I've already paid this month's utility bill." I felt a small, hot flush of embarrassment. I answered quickly, "Oh, I'm so sorry, dear. The rain was just terrible today. I couldn't get out to the bank. I'll be sure to give you the money tomorrow, I promise." She said nothing in response. She just gave a single, small nod, then turned and walked away down the hall. But I saw it. In that one fleeting second, I saw her eyes. I will never forget that look. It was cold and edged with something else, a faint, unmistakable flicker of disappointment. That was the day. That was the day something began to change. It was a quiet change, almost silent, but it was definite. The air in the house grew heavier, colder. The small kindnesses started to disappear first. No one asked, "How was your day, Mom?" when we sat down for dinner anymore. The simple question, which had once been a small bridge between my world and theirs, was just gone. The smiles I used to get in the morning vanished too. In their place, a strange, thick silence settled over the dinner table. And I began to notice the way their eyes would slide right past me, as if I were just another chair, a lamp, a piece of furniture they had grown so used to that they no longer saw it at all. One evening, trying to find my voice again, I said quietly, "You know, maybe we should watch a little less television at night. The electricity bill must be quite high." Jessica, who had been scrolling through her phone, didn't even look up at first. Then, she slowly raised her head, her expression a perfect blank. "People who don't pay the bills," she said, her voice as calm and smooth as glass, "don't get to have an opinion on them." I felt the air leave my lungs. I was frozen to my chair. It wasn't just a sharp retort. It was a knife. A small, sharp, perfectly aimed knife, and with those words, she had sliced through the last, thin, fragile thread of connection between us. I didn't say another word. I just stood up, turned, and walked back to the quiet of my room. That night, I lay in bed, staring into the darkness, unable to sleep. My mind drifted back through the years, and I found myself thinking of my mother. I remembered when she had gotten too old to live on her own. She had gone to live with my brother and his wife. I remember visiting one afternoon and hearing my sister-in-law speak to her in a cold, dismissive tone. "You're no help at all around here," she'd said right in front of me. "You don't contribute a thing." I remembered the fury that had risen up in my chest. I couldn't stand to see my mother treated that way, to see her dignity stripped away. But now I was the one standing in her shoes. I was the one who contributed nothing. I was the one who was no help at all. The next morning, I gathered all the courage I had. I found Jessica in the kitchen and tried to make my voice sound as casual and polite as possible. "Jessica," I started. "I was thinking, perhaps I should give you another $200 each month for the household expenses." She was standing at the counter, peeling an apple with a small paring knife, the red skin falling away in a single, perfect spiral. She paused, looked up at me, and a small, bright smile touched her lips. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice light and sweet, "if you had that kind of money, you wouldn't need to be living with us in the first place, would you?" The words were so breezy, so pleasant sounding. But they were a wall. With that one gentle sentence, she had pushed me firmly to the other side of a line, the side labeled outsider. I managed a quiet, thin smile of my own. But that night, I went to my closet, pulled out the old dented tin cookie box, and took out all of my financial papers. I laid them out on my little tea table. The savings passbook, the certificates of deposit. I checked each one, noting the maturity dates, arranging them in a neat stack. Then, I took a roll of clear packing tape and sealed the entire bundle, wrapping it again and again until it was a solid, protected block. In that quiet moment, I understood something with perfect, painful clarity. No one had said it out loud yet. No one had told me to leave. But my very presence in this house, my existence, was slowly, surely becoming the problem. I don't hate them for it. I truly don't. My only plan was to withdraw, to fade away quietly. I started trying to be more useful. I did more chores around the house. I did all the laundry, washed every dish, mopped the floors. I started making the old dishes Michael had loved as a boy, the ones his grandmother used to make, but it made no difference. We almost never sat and ate together as a family anymore. Michael worked from morning until night. When he came home, his face was constantly illuminated by the blue glow of his phone. The simple words, "Hey Mom, how are you doing?" faded from his vocabulary, and then disappeared entirely. My grandson was still my one source of light. He was as sweet and loving as ever, and he would still sneak into my room each night to tell me about his day at school. But I knew that as long as Jessica did not approve of our closeness, this small warmth was fragile. It was a connection that could be broken at any moment. Whenever I walked into the living room, the conversation would falter for a second. A small, awkward pause would hang in the air until I had passed through. Whenever I dared to speak, to offer a comment on the news or the weather, I could feel Jessica's eyes on me. Her gaze said what her mouth did not. "You have no right to speak here." Right? So I started counting. Not counting in the hopeful way, like a child waiting for a holiday. I was counting for self-defense. I was tallying the slights, the cold silences, the dismissive glances. Because I could already feel the truth of it, deep in my bones. The truth is that what lies at the end of endurance, at the end of patience, is not kindness or understanding. It is a quiet, sharp, and total exclusion. And so, for the first time in 20 years, I began to keep a diary again. I wrote about the feeling of the house, a space full of the sounds of people, but utterly cold. I wrote about the dinner table, a place where no one made eye contact. I wrote about the growing feeling of being an unnecessary person, an existence that could be erased without anyone even noticing. That feeling, more than any other, grew stronger with each passing day. I haven't fought back. Not yet. But deep inside my heart, in a place I thought had gone cold and dark forever, a tiny flame had flickered to life. It wasn't anger, and it wasn't hurt. It was vigilance. March 18th. A cold spring rain had been falling since morning. It wasn't a heavy downpour, just a persistent, chilling drizzle that refused to stop. It made the air feel heavy and damp, and inside the house it was dark and gloomy. The whole day felt suffocating. During a brief lull when the rain softened to a fine mist, I took the basket of laundry out to the small backyard to hang it on the clothesline. The yard was little more than a patio, paved with old flagstones, the cracks between them thick with a lush green moss. I stepped carefully, 1 foot at a time, trying not to slip on the slick, wet stones. But then, just as I reached up to clip a kitchen towel to the line, it happened. My foot slipped out from under me. I pitched forward, my arms flailing. My shoulder crashed into the sharp corner of the steel cellar door, and then my entire left side slammed down hard onto the unforgiving flagstones. The sound of the impact was sickeningly loud. A blinding, white-hot pain exploded from my shoulder and shot through my entire body. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't even think. I just lay there on the cold stone, gasping for breath. The fine, misty rain continued to fall, soaking my back, making my thin house dress cling unpleasantly to my skin. The cold from the stone seeped into my bones. As I struggled to push myself up, I heard the back door slide open and the sound of footsteps. It was Jessica. She had her phone pressed to her ear, and I could hear the faint murmur of her conversation. She saw me crumpled on the ground, and she paused for maybe 2 seconds, her eyes taking in the scene. Without breaking her stride, without a single change in her tone of voice, she spoke into the air as she passed me. "You should wipe that up," she said. "It's wet there." And then she was gone, back inside the house. I could only stare at her retreating back. A thick, painful lump formed in my throat. It wasn't just the physical pain anymore. It was a solid mass of unspoken, unspeakable emotion, lodging itself deep in my chest. Gritting my teeth against the fire in my shoulder, I finally managed to get to my hands and knees. I used my good right hand to drag a dish towel toward me, and I began to wipe the wet flagstones, one by one, crawling painfully across the patio. I didn't want to be a bother. I didn't want to make a scene. It's nothing, I told myself over and over. It's just a little fall. It will be better tomorrow. But it wasn't better. Through the afternoon, my shoulder began to swell, the skin turning an ugly, mottled red. By evening, I could barely move my left arm at all. That night, I put on a loose, long-sleeved sweater, pulling the sleeve down to hide the angry purple bruise that was blooming across my upper arm. At dinner time, I sat in my usual spot at the far end of the table. I couldn't use my left hand, so I ate slowly and awkwardly with just my right, fumbling with my fork. I dropped it twice. No one bent to pick it up for me. Michael, my son, was lost in his own world, scrolling through work emails on his phone, eating his meal in a focused, silent rhythm. He never even looked up. Jessica, however, was watching me. After a moment, she looked directly at me and spoke, her voice clear and precise. "Mrs. Vance, you don't need to worry about the dishes tonight. Your only responsibility here is to be quiet." I lifted my head and looked at her. Her expression was perfectly, unnervingly calm. There was no anger in her face, no contempt. There was only the cold, plain, unadorned truth. Michael glanced up for a fraction of a second, his eyes flickering between us, but he said nothing. He just looked back down at his phone. I said nothing either. I lowered my head, silently speared a piece of carrot with my fork, put it in my mouth, and chewed. In that moment, I didn't even feel sadness. What I felt was a vast, hollow emptiness. When the meal was over, I stood up and tried to clear my plate. But the pain in my shoulder was too intense. I couldn't lift my arm. Jessica glided over to me. She took the plate from my hand, her movement so swift and smooth it was almost like she was snatching it away, and said, "You just rest, Mrs. Vance. I'll take care of it." Her words, on the surface, could have been mistaken for kindness. But I knew exactly what they were. It was a dismissal, a release from duty. It was the quiet, final declaration that I was no longer needed here, in any capacity at all. Later that night, back in my room, I struggled with one hand to apply a heating pad and rub some pain cream onto my throbbing shoulder. The pain medication I'd bought a while ago was tucked away in a small box on the shelf next to my little tea table. When I slid open the drawer beneath it, I saw them. A neat stack of old bank passbooks, the kind with the thin cardboard covers, all bundled together and sealed tight with clear packing tape. I just stared at them for a long time. They weren't just paper and numbers. They were pieces of my life. They were the proof of a quiet history. Of all the hours I had stacked one on top of the other, a story no one else knew. A struggle no one had ever asked about. I had started saving that money back when Michael was still in middle school. Some of it was from the insurance money I got after Robert died, every single penny of it, which I'd quietly deposited in the bank without telling a soul, without spending a single dollar. Each one of those little books held a memory. There was the year I came down with a terrible fever and was laid up in bed for 4 days straight. I remembered forcing myself to get up on the 5th day, my body still aching, to open the little sundry shop because we needed the money. There was the day I had only $70 left in my wallet, but I didn't hesitate for a second when I handed it over to Michael for his new textbooks. I remembered the holidays, staying up all night long wrapping holiday gift baskets for a local business, my fingers stiff and sore, just to make the delivery deadline the next morning. But now, in this house, I was seen as nothing more than a fixture, something built into the floorboards, a presence that made no difference whether I was here or not. I didn't want to cry. I told myself I wouldn't, and I didn't want to blame anyone, not really, but the dull, throbbing ache in my shoulder just wouldn't stop. It was a constant, nagging reminder, as if it were trying to speak to me. It seemed to be saying, "Wounds don't only happen to the body, Eleanor. Sometimes it's a careless look or a handful of quiet words that cuts the deepest of all. I reached into the drawer and pulled out the oldest passbook in the stack. Its cover had yellowed to a pale, brittle tan. On the very first page, written in my own careful ballpoint pen script, were the words, "First deposit for Michael's college fund, $100. A small, quiet smile touched my lips. I don't need anyone to know what I've done. I am not looking for anyone's sympathy. But in that moment, staring at that faded ink, a new understanding settled over me with a hard, cold clarity. I could not go on living like this, in silence. It was no longer possible, and so I made a decision. It wasn't an act of rebellion. It wasn't about fighting back. It was about preparing to protect the one single thing I had left, my dignity. I sat there in my room for a long time, perfectly still. From just outside my window, I could hear the sound of the rain dripping from the edge of the roof. A slow, steady rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. As if it were counting the seconds of my life. That quiet, lonely sound felt like it was the rhythm of my own existence. I opened the window just a crack and let the cool air drift into the room. A faint, earthy smell of wet soil came with it. My room is tucked away at the back of the house, right next to the small laundry room and kitchen. I can hear everything from here. The soft scuff of slippers on the hallway floor when someone walks by, the clink of dishes in the sink, the rush of water from the faucet. And sometimes, I can hear someone sigh. I never know whose sigh it is. It could be Jessica's, a sigh of exhaustion from having an unwanted guest in her home. It could be Michael's, a sigh of stress from his demanding job. Or maybe it was my own sigh. A sound that escapes from the deepest part of my heart, but so quiet, so small, that no one else can ever hear it. I picked up my old medicine box. Inside, there were a few painkillers, a small jar of muscle rub, and a single sheet of paper. It was the report from my last physical, back in Virginia before I moved. The doctor had diagnosed me with mild hypertension and told me to avoid any strenuous activity. But I never told anyone in this house about it. It wasn't that I was trying to hide it. I just didn't think it was necessary to tell them. I didn't want to be a bother to anyone. I didn't want to become a burden. But maybe from the very first moment I stepped through the front door of this house, I had already pasted that label onto my own forehead. Think about Michael. He isn't a bad person. He was always such a good boy, honest, a hard worker in school, never one to talk back to me. But I suppose that somewhere along the way, buried under the busyness of his life, the pressure of his job, and the simple, relentless passage of time, he must have forgotten. He must have forgotten the day I stood in the pouring rain without an umbrella, just so I could watch him walk onto his college campus for the first time, on his first day of classes. Now, I could be standing in that same rain, and there would be no one waiting for me. No one to even notice I was gone. I'm not blaming Michael. I'm not. I just think that the distance between us can no longer be measured in miles. Instead, all that lies between us now is an endless, heavy silence. I tried to roll my shoulder just a little, and a sharp, stabbing pain shot through me. But I didn't make a sound. I'm used to it by now. I stood up, went to the small dresser, and took out a thick towel. I folded it carefully and placed it over my left shoulder. My right hand was trembling, but I could still take care of myself. I have never once allowed myself to become completely helpless. From the living room, I could hear my grandson's happy laughter. He was watching a cartoon on television. I didn't recognize the name of the show, but I smiled. A real, soft smile. Right now, in this entire house, he might be the only one who still treats me like a person. He's the only one who doesn't measure my worth by whether I am useful or not. He just smiles at me. Someone told me a long time ago, old people are like old furniture. You keep them around as long as they're useful. When they're not, you stick them in the attic and forget about them. I never believed it. I refuse to. I am not a piece of furniture. I am a human being. I have a heart and I have memories. On nights when I can't sleep, I lie awake and replay a single kind word someone once said to me. over and over again, just to feel its warmth. That is the kind of human I am. And then a thought occurred to me. When was the last time someone in this house called me by my name? I am Grandma. Or, when something is needed, I am Mom. But no one has called me Eleanor in a very, very long time. The nurses at the clinic back home, they always called me Mrs. Party, Vance, or even Eleanor. They used my name. From an old photo album, I took out a single picture. It was from my wedding day. Robert and I are standing side by side in front of a simple, painted screen. I'm wearing a plain dress, my face is so young. But my eyes are the same as they are now. They are the eyes of someone who endures, who waits, and who, despite everything, refuses to give up hope. On the back of the photograph, in my husband's faded handwriting, it says, Eleanor, the woman who never complains. I asked myself, right there in the quiet of my room, should I keep honoring those words? Because I was beginning to understand something. If you stay silent for too long, people start to believe something about you. They start to believe you don't have any feelings at all. I closed the window, clicked the lock into place, and sat down at my little table. I opened the simple notebook I had started using as a daily journal. And then, I wrote a single line. March 18th. Slipped and fell hanging the laundry. Injured left shoulder. Juan asked about it. Just one line. But for me, it was a testimony. It was proof. Proof that I was alive. Proof that I had felt pain. Proof that I had been hurt. And proof that I had not been seen. I don't want anyone's pity. But if only someone, just one person had come to me and asked that simple question. Mom, are you in pain? If they had, I think I would have truly, finally, broken down and cried. But no one asked. And so, I did not cry. I simply switched off the light, carefully turned onto my right side to avoid putting pressure on my aching shoulder, and closed my eyes. I know that one day, I will have to stand up. I will have to stand on my own 2 feet, with my memories, and with everything I have built over a lifetime of 72 years. But not today. Today, just for one night, I only wanted to remember my own name. Eleanor Vance. I am still alive. April 1st. Today is my grandson's 6th birthday. From the moment the sun came up, the house was buzzing with a happy energy. Jessica had ordered a big, elaborate birthday cake from a popular bakery in town, and she'd invited several families from my grandson's kindergarten class to come and celebrate. Balloons in bright primary colors were taped to the walls of the living room, and upbeat pop music played from a small speaker on the bookshelf. The warm, greasy smell of fried chicken, French fries, and fizzy soda seemed to fill every corner of the house. As always, I had woken up early. But today, just for today, there was a little flutter of unease in my chest. It was a strange mix of excitement and a quiet, nameless anxiety. I had already placed my gift on the corner of the dining room table, a single, small, hand-wrapped box. Inside was a miniature wooden dollhouse. It was something I had spent the last week working on, putting it together piece by tiny piece every single night. It had a bright red roof and a little white picket fence. Inside, there was a tiny table and 2 chairs, and standing guard at the front door was a small, hand-carved wooden dog. I'd cut each tiny piece with a handsaw, sanded it smooth with fine grit paper, and glued it all together with wood glue. Then, I had carefully painted every detail with non-toxic, child-safe paint. I did all the work at night. After my grandson Leo had fallen fast asleep, I worked quietly in my room, with only a small desk lamp to light my hands, the faint, chemical smell of the wood glue hanging in the air. And as I worked, a single thought played over and over in my mind. A hopeful little prayer. He's going to love it. I know he will. I could picture his face, his eyes lighting up when he saw it. This wasn't just a present. It was a piece of my heart. And it was a way of giving him a little piece of my own childhood, all packed into one small, simple box. The party started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. the house filled with the sound of children's squeals and laughter, and the low, pleasant hum of the adults' conversations. I was wearing a simple gray knit sweater, my hair pulled back neatly. I held the small gift, wrapped in plain brown paper, in my hands, waiting for just the right moment. After everyone had finished singing "Happy Birthday" and the cake had been cut and passed around, Jessica clapped her hands together and called out in a loud, cheerful voice, "All right, everyone, it's time for presents." One by one, the children brought their gifts to Leo: a remote-controlled monster truck, a digital watch with a bright blue band, a little robot that danced when you clapped your hands. I waited until the room had quieted down a little, then I slowly made my way over to my grandson. I knelt down beside him so we were at eye level. "Grandma made this for you, sweetie," I said softly. "I really hope you like it." Leo gave me his usual bright, sweet smile and took the little box from me with both hands. And it was in that exact moment Jessica glided over to us. Her eyes fell on the simple, paper-wrapped box in Leo's hands. A small, sharp laugh, more like a snort, escaped from her nose. "Such a cheap-looking little toy," she said, her voice dripping with amusement. "He'll very you, Mrs. Vance." In that instant, the entire atmosphere of the room shifted. The music was still playing, but for a moment, it felt as though everyone had stopped moving, had stopped breathing. I just stood there, frozen. I didn't say a word. I didn't react. I didn't even lift my head. I was used to it by now. But Jessica wasn't finished. This time, she looked directly at me, her eyes filled with an open, undisguised contempt. "To get old and have your life amount to nothing, it's just garbage, isn't it?" she said, her voice still light. "No money, no use to anyone." A low murmur rippled through the other adults in the room. Michael's face went pale. In a low voice he said, "Jessica, that's enough." But she just shrugged her shoulders and kept going. "What? I'm just telling the truth. She just sits in this house all day, doing a little cleaning. She never talks, she's useless. And her present handmade from scraps of cheap wood. It's a perfect match, isn't it?" The room fell completely, utterly silent. The other children just stared, their faces blank with confusion. My grandson, Leo, looked up at me, his lips pressed into a tight, thin line. I slowly, gently, clenched my hands into fists at my sides. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something else. It was the first time in my entire life that I realized, with a sudden, shocking clarity, that something had to end. Without a word, I turned and walked slowly back to my room. From the bottom drawer of my dresser, I took out an envelope I had prepared a long time ago. Inside was a certified bank statement, stamped with the bank's official red seal. And there was one other thing. An old savings passbook with a bright red label on the cover, its corners soft and worn from years of handling. The balance printed inside was $1,324,570. It was everything. Everything I had silently, painstakingly saved since the day my husband, Robert, had passed away. I didn't want to show it off. I didn't want to get back at anyone. I just wanted to quietly remind them of a simple truth, that a person's worth can never be measured by a pair of condescending eyes. I walked back into the living room. Everyone was still standing exactly where I had left them, trapped in a thick, uncomfortable silence. I placed the envelope and the savings passbook on the dining room table, right in front of Jessica. I didn't say a word. I didn't let a single flicker of emotion show on my face, but that one quiet, simple gesture landed with the force of a thunderclap in the silent room. Michael walked over to the table. He leaned down and peered at the papers, and his face, already pale, turned a ghostly shade of white. "Mom," he whispered, his voice shaking. What is this?" I gave him a small, slight nod. "It's my savings passbook," I said, my voice even and calm. "And the balance statement. I had it updated just last week." Jessica couldn't move. Her eyes were wide, staring at the numbers on the page. After a long moment, she tore her gaze away, turned without a word, and walked out of the room. No one else spoke. Not a single person. There was no need to get angry. There was no need to shout. And there was certainly no need for tears. Not anymore. With one single silent action, the existence that had been dismissed as worthless had sent a quiet, powerful tremor through the very foundation of this house. I walked back over to my grandson and gently stroked his hair. "Grandma made that for you," I said softly. "It's not an expensive gift, I know, but for a whole week, I poured all of my heart into it. If you like it, I hope you'll take good care of it." Leo looked up at me and gave a small, solemn nod. I gave him a quiet, gentle smile. Then I returned to my room, closed the door behind me, and let out a long, deep breath. It was the first sigh of quiet, true relief I had taken in months. What happened today wasn't an ending, but it was, without a doubt, a boundary line, the boundary between endurance and dignity. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty. From this day forward, I would never, ever bow my head again. Back in my room, I sat down gently on the edge of my bed. My right hand was trembling, just slightly. It wasn't from fear. It felt more like the emotions I had pushed down, deep into my chest for so long, had finally found a small crack to seep through. It was a slow, quiet release. I never would have imagined that just by placing a single old passbook on a table, I could make that entire room fall so completely silent. But I knew the truth. What I had placed on that table wasn't just money. It was my voice. It was the small, quiet voice that I had locked away so deep inside of myself that I thought no one would ever hear it again. I don't want to be a bother. T.A. I don't want to be an embarrassment. D.S. I don't want my children to have to worry about me. All of those thoughts, all of those fears, had been the words I'd swallowed. The voice I'd buried at the very bottom of my heart. I took out a small slip of paper from my nightstand drawer and, in my old-fashioned, rounded handwriting, I wrote, "A person can be loved even without money. But without respect, all the money in the world is just a number." I didn't write a name on it. I just hoped that someone in this house might happen to see it one day and understand. I knew the truth of what I was. And I had finally answered their cruelty in the quietest, most powerful way I knew how. The entire feeling of the house, which I could sense even from my room, had changed completely. The happy laughter was gone, the music had been turned off, and I could hear the hurried, shuffling sounds of the guests gathering their things to leave. I heard one of the children's voices, clear as a bell. "Mommy, is Grandma sad?" "No, honey," her mother replied, her voice hushed. She's just a little tired." Then I heard one of the adults whisper to another, "I can't believe she had that much money. I had no idea." I heard every word. I heard it all, even with my door shut tight. But what echoed in my ears wasn't the sound of their voices. It was a strange, hollow kind of emptiness that had been born deep inside my own heart. What surprised them wasn't their own behavior. It was the fact that I had money. I wasn't sure if I should feel sad about that, or if, somewhere deep inside, I should feel a quiet sense of, finally, you understand. I honestly didn't know which it was. I glanced at the clock. The shorthand was just touching the 7. The number of days I had lived in this house, exactly 180. 6 months. I had waited. I had wished. I had endured. If I am just kind, I told myself, one day, they will see it. One day, it will get through to them. I truly believed that. I understand now. Kindness, if there is no one willing to see it, is just like clear, empty air. It goes completely unnoticed. I leaned my body to the side and reached into the back of the drawer, pulling out another notebook. It had a worn, cloth cover. The corners were frayed, and there were small, faded ink stains dotting the fabric. It was my diary. Slowly, I began to write. Today, for the first time, I looked up and saw everyone at the party. And I felt that I was not small. I stopped my pen, just one line. But with that single sentence, I was able to tell myself what I needed to hear. Starting tomorrow, I will think about a different future. A place where there are no eyes looking down on me. A place where I don't need to hear the words, "I'm sorry." All I wanted was a window where the morning light could gently stream in, and a place where someone would call me by my name, Eleanor. That night, after all the guests had gone home, the house was draped in a strange and profound silence. The sound of the children's laughter was gone. The melody of the music had faded away. The only sound left was the quiet drip, drip of the rainwater that had collected on the eaves, falling softly to the ground below. I went back to my room and sat gently on the edge of the bed. On the little table, the bank passbook and the certified statement I had shown. Them were still lying there. I was now taking out another notebook, and in its pages, I was carefully reorganizing a list of all my significant expenses over the years. I wanted to put this chapter of my life in order one last time with my own hands. It was around 9 o'clock at night. I heard a soft, small knock on my door. Tap, tap. It was a gentle sound, almost hesitant. "Mom!" It was Michael's voice. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the closed door. I wanted to know what he was holding in his heart, right now. On the other side of that door, the son I had dedicated my entire life to raising. Another small knock. "Mom, can I come in?" I stood up and quietly opened the door. The light from the hallway illuminated Michael's face. He looked tired, and his expression was a mixture of confusion and helplessness. He couldn't seem to look me straight in the eye. "Mom, about today, are you angry?" I didn't say anything. I just pulled out the small chair from my table and motioned for him to sit. Then I returned to my spot on the bed. I wasn't angry. But I was tired. Tired of pretending not to hear. Tired of pretending not to feel hurt. Tired of pretending I didn't exist. I was just so very tired of pretending. A long silence stretched between us before Michael finally spoke again. "Mom, what are you going to do with that money? Nearly $1.5 million. How long have you had it?" I looked at him then. You're right into his eyes. For the first time in so many years, I didn't see him as my child, as my son. I saw him as the man he had become, as another adult sitting in front of me. And I answered him. I have lived here and been treated like a burden. So now, I am going to a place where they meet an old woman with a smile. Michael lowered his head deeply, his face hidden from my view. He said nothing else. I just sat there and listened to the sound of his long, slow sigh filling the quiet room. I'm sure he understood. He must have known that if he had any pride left at all, the only true act of sincerity he could offer me in that moment was his silence. After he left, I closed the door again. I went back to my table to finish my final task. It was the contract for an assisted living facility. I had been getting the paperwork ready for a month. Yes, I had been preparing for this for a long time. It started on that day, the day I fell in the backyard. Not a single person had asked me, "Are you okay?" In that moment, I realized the truth. There was no longer a place for me in this house. But I was not going to leave as if I were being thrown out. I was going to leave because I had chosen to. That was the decision I had made. To choose, for myself, a place where I would be treated like a human being. The next morning, the sky was clear and bright. A soft, gentle spring sunlight poured through my window. I woke up at my usual early hour and cleaned my room. I folded my bedding, wiped down the little table, and rearranged the old books on my shelf. And as a final touch, I placed the miniature wooden dollhouse I had made right in the center of the table. It was a small, silent goodbye to the grandson I would no longer be able to hold in my arms. I didn't wake anyone. I knew that in this house there was no need for parting words anymore. I picked up my small carry-on bag and walked to the front door. Inside were a few spring outfits, my medications, and an envelope containing all the necessary documents for my transfer of care. The taxi arrived at 6:15 in the morning. I got into the car, and without a single glance back, I quietly faced forward. The retirement community I had chosen was in a quiet town in the Hudson Valley. It was a peaceful place, near a river. The grounds had gardens full of flowers, and most importantly, it had a small library just for the elderly residents. It was a place where older people could read or paint or learn to play an instrument. Or they could simply sit together and talk, quietly. When I walked through the main entrance, a staff member at the reception desk bowed her head deeply. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance, we've been expecting you. We have your room ready for you. It's number 203. Mrs. Vance." The moment I heard those words, I felt tears welling up in my eyes, threatening to spill over. To be called by my name. How long had it been? How very, very long. The room I was shown to was bright and clean, with a small balcony that looked out over a row of beautiful flowering cherry trees. I let out a soft breath. "And you..." Finally, I have come back to a place that feels like my own. That was the feeling that washed over me in that moment. Within that first week, I took care of one very important piece of business. I went to the bank and filed the paperwork to change the beneficiary. Information on my accounts. I had my son's name officially removed. I didn't do it as an act of revenge. I did it simply so that my silence would not be mistaken for surrender. Then, I went to the post office and mailed a large envelope to the elementary school in my hometown back in Virginia. It was the same school that my husband, Robert, and I had attended as children. Inside the envelope was the application form for a $200,000 donation to establish a new library. The name on the dedication read, "The Robert Vance Memorial Library." My husband, Robert. The man who was taken from me too soon, but who had given me everything that was my youth. The only way I could truly repay his kindness was to ensure that his name would be carried on into the future. For my entire life, I had always lived for someone else. But now, for this final chapter of my life, it's all right to make a kind choice, just for myself. I was finally able to believe that. That evening, after all the intake paperwork was finished and I had unpacked the last of my belongings in my new room, I sat alone in a small armchair by the window. A gentle night breeze drifted through the rows of cherry blossoms behind the facility, carrying the faint, sweet scent of their flowers. The soft light from the lamps in the hallway filtered through the frosted glass of my door, casting a quiet, glowing stripe across the wooden floor. I opened my diary and, very gently, added a single line. April 1st. The first day in a place so far away, with no one to see me off. There were no tears there on the page, but that one sentence held the quiet, final record of a chapter of my life closing for good. I remember Michael's eyes, the way he looked at me last night as he stood frozen in front of my door. He wasn't angry, he wasn't sad, he was just quiet, with the look of someone who had finally understood. Something enormous, as if the mother who had always wiped the sweat from his brow as a child had, somewhere along the way, become an adult with her own will, a woman who could choose to walk away, and he simply hadn't been prepared to see it. And I remember the sound of Jessica's door as she slammed it shut. "Take si rake." It was like an exclamation point, stabbed into the heart of the silence. Proud and strong, and saying everything without a single word. But all of that is in the past now. I don't blame anyone anymore. And I'm not holding on to any hope that they will change. It's just that. Someday, if by some chance, they open the diary I left behind, or if they hear this story from someone else, I hope they remember, just for a moment, the elderly do not exist simply to be taken in. We have a right to be respected too, even if we are quiet, even if we seem weak, even if it looks as though we have nothing left to give. That evening, a young woman from the nursing staff brought me a mug of warm milk. She smiled at me, a kind, genuine smile, and said, "Mrs. Vance, if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to call." I nodded and answered in a small voice, "Thank you. You know, today is my grandson's birthday." "Oh, is that right? Did you get a chance to call him?" "No, that's all right. I don't need to. As long as he's smiling, that's all that matters to me." I turned my face away slightly, toward the window, and hid the single, warm tear that slipped down my cheek. It was not a tear of sadness. It was because, at long last, I had given myself permission to feel a true, deep sense of peace. I set the milk down on the small table and draped a thin wool blanket over my knees. Tomorrow, I thought to myself, I'll write a letter to my old elementary school. I want them to choose the design that lets the most sunlight into the new library. And then, maybe I'll sign up for the piano class they offer here at the facility. In the second half of my life, I have lost so many things. But that's all right. Because the time I have left, I will choose how to live it, with my own 2 hands, for myself. It was about 2 weeks after I had left my son's house. Everything began to unfold like a wave that no one could stop. Quietly, but with an undeniable force. I don't use social media, but one morning, as I was making a cup of tea, one of the staff members, a young woman named Sarah, came to my door and whispered to me, "Mrs. Vance, have you seen the video? A video from your grandson's birthday party. It's spreading all over the internet." I looked up, my brow furrowing just a little. A video? What are you talking about?" She held out her smartphone, hesitating for a moment before she spoke. "You don't have to watch it if you don't want to. But I thought you should." "No." I took the phone from her quietly. On the screen was a video, not even 2 minutes long. It was a view of the living room on that day, filmed secretly from an angle off to the side. The picture quality was grainy, but the audio was perfectly clear. Jessica's voice, the mocking laughter, the insults, and the exact moment I placed my savings passbook on the table. It was all there, every second of it. I was speechless. It wasn't because I was ashamed, I was just so stunned. Because I realized who had filmed it, my little grandson. At the very end of the video, I could hear a tiny, faint whisper. "Grandma, I'm recording this. So later, everyone will know that you weren't wrong," I cried, silently, without making a sound. It wasn't because I wanted the misunderstanding to be cleared up. It was just that. In that house, a place I thought my heart had grown completely cold, there was still a tiny bit of warmth left. And that simple fact made me so incredibly, overwhelmingly happy. A few days later, a national news website picked up the story. Grandmother insulted by daughter-in-law on grandson's birthday. The truth behind the one batter. 45 million savings account. Hashtags started to trend. "Sorry, Grandma Eleanor, you are not a burden." Hundreds, then thousands of comments poured in. Some people were furious. What is wrong with our society? A mother who spent her whole life raising her son gets insulted just because she didn't hand over her money. Some people wrote through their tears, "I used to treat my own mother the same way Jessica did. I am so ashamed of myself." And there were messages from young people too. "Grandma Eleanor, please stay strong and healthy. You are a person who deserves to live with pride." But in the middle of that great, crashing wave of voices, all I felt was quiet. I wasn't happy. It didn't feel like a victory. It just felt as though a little bit of the weight had been lifted from my heart. Finally, the truth had been seen, and that was a relief. A week later, I received a letter from my son, a plain white envelope, a familiar handwriting. The address was for the retirement community where I now lived. Inside, the letter said, "Mom, I don't know where to begin. Ever since you left, the house feels strangely empty. There are still 3 of us at the dinner table, but the smell of that simple soup you used to make is gone. So is the quiet clink of the dishes you'd set out, and the sight of your hand wiping the table before we ate. They're all gone. Mom, I am so sorry. It's not about the money. It's that I let you become lonely inside your own home, inside our home. I have just one thing to ask. Please, let me see you. I want to finally say the words I haven't said for over 30 years. I want to say thank you." I folded the letter slowly and placed it on the table next to my diary. I did not write back. It wasn't because I was still angry. I just didn't want to rush to a place of forgiveness. I didn't want to wrap it up so neatly. A few days after that, a television station called the facility, asking if they could interview me. I refused. I have no desire to become a symbol. All I want is to be a quiet old woman who takes a walk under the cherry trees in the morning and plays simple notes on an electric piano in the evening. That's all I want to be. I signed up for the piano class. The young teacher asked me gently, "Eleanor, is there a special song from your memory that you'd like to learn to play?" I smiled and replied, "Any song I can play with just 3 fingers will be more than enough." I started keeping a diary again. But this time, it wasn't to write about my pain. It was to quietly record the things I have learned over more than 70 years of life. On the first page, I wrote, "A person can live without money, but a person cannot live if their dignity has been taken away." One day, a small package arrived for me. Inside was the little miniature wooden house, the one I had given my grandson as a present. Tucked inside with it was a small piece of paper with a note, written in a child's careful hand. "For Grandma, I'm keeping it safe, I promise. But next time you come home, can we put the roof on together?" A soft smile found its way to my lips. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Outside my window, spring was quietly making its presence known. The buds on the cherry trees were beginning to stir, their tight fists slowly unfurling, revealing just a hint of the soft pink that lay dormant within. I slipped on my coat and stepped outside. I took one deep, clean breath, filling my lungs with the cool, damp air, and then I tilted my head back to look at the sky. Life goes on. It still goes on. It still goes on. You carry the scars of what you've been through, and yet you find a way to stand up straight, quietly, but with the certainty that grows stronger every day. You begin again. That is why I am here. I am no longer simply waiting for them to come find me. But if, one day, the same person who slammed that door shut in such a hurry were to gently push it open again with their own 2 hands, well, I wouldn't turn my back. It's not because I would forgive them. It's simply because that feeling, that raw anger, doesn't live inside of me anymore. Right now, I am practicing how to live as myself, without clinging to memories, without relying on anyone else's opinion of who I am. In the afternoons, I've started attending a calligraphy class with a few of the other older residents. My hands tremble a little, it's true, but the moment I pick up the brush, a strange and wonderful calm settles over my heart. One day, our assignment was to write a single word: respect. I dipped the brush in the ink and moved my hand slowly across the paper. The first horizontal stroke was a little crooked, but I didn't try to fix it. I left it just as it was. It was a small message, a quiet reminder to myself. Respect is not some kind of reward that someone else gives to you. It should be the very foundation of every relationship between human beings. A few days later, a member of the staff brought me an envelope. There was no return address, no name. Inside, I found 3 old photographs. The first was my wedding picture, Robert and me standing side by side. The second showed me holding Michael when he was just a baby, his tiny head nestled in the crook of my arm. And the last one, it was a picture of me standing in the hallway of my son's house, peeling an apple. The light was coming in from a side window, casting a long shadow across my face. You could see every wrinkle etched into my skin, clear as day, but my expression was completely, perfectly serene. There were no words included with the photos. No note. But I knew. I knew that somewhere, that person was still holding on to the memory of our life together. I carefully arranged the 3 photographs on my small desk. Next to them, I placed the little wooden house my grandson had sent back to me. And beside that, the new library design proposals I was reviewing. Sometimes, I just sit there in my chair and I look at those pictures for a long, long time. It's not because I feel nostalgic, and it's certainly not because I have any regrets. It's so I can say to myself, quietly and firmly, this is proof. This is proof that I have lived. My life has not been an easy one, not by any means. But there has never, not for a single moment, been a time when I was a piece of garbage. And from now on, even if there are people who will never understand my worth, I will not allow their ignorance to make this time I have left into something small or meaningless. I refuse. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 76 years old. And I have finally learned. I have learned that you can live your life without bowing your head. I no longer wait for someone to apologize. I no longer listen for the sound of a knock on the door that is long overdue. Instead, I wake up early every morning, walk one full lap around the facility's garden, water the small potted plant on my balcony, and practice playing my old electric piano, one slow note at a time. I have started keeping a diary again, too. It's not long, it's not philosophical. Just a few honest lines to record the day. Sunny today. Had breakfast with Mrs. Bisses. Miller, she said to me. Once you get old and you can't smile anymore, all that's left is to count the days. I just nodded. Because you don't need a reason to smile. If you're alive, if your heart is still beating, that's reason enough. One day, a letter came from the elementary school in my old hometown. Inside, it said, "We would be honored to invite you to the grand opening of the Robert Vance Memorial Library. We are all so proud to have your husband's name grace our new building." I didn't go back, but I sent a letter in my place. If, in that library, a child opens a book and finds a poem that speaks to their heart, and if they learn from it what it means to live a gentle life, then my husband and I, even though we are in different worlds now, will both be able to rest a little easier. With the letter, I enclosed a small wooden bookmark I had carved myself. On it I had etched a few tiny words. Respect is a gift that never grows old. I am not a perfect person. For so many years, I just endured things in silence. I told myself, you're an adult. You have to be patient. If I just sacrifice enough of myself, one day, someone will finally understand. That is the lie I told myself for so long. But human beings are not a math equation. It doesn't matter how much money you give them, or how many chores you do, or how low you bow your head when you walk. It doesn't mean that your worth will automatically be understood. I have spent most of my life living for someone else. But the rest of my life, I have decided to live it for myself. And now, to you, the person who is reading this, I have just one question I want to ask. Are you living your life right now as a person? Or are you living as a shadow inside the very house that you helped to build? If you are a father or a mother and no one ever calls you by your name, and you quietly clear the kitchen, take out the trash, and watch your grandchildren without a word, if you have bowed your head again and again just because you didn't want to be a bother, if you have sat at a noisy dinner table and no one ever thought to ask, "Mom, was the food good? Dad, are you tired today?" If you have never been asked even that one simple question, then please, I want you to know this. You are not invisible. You have not passed your expiration date, and you do not need money to be loved. The moment you decide to value yourself, that is the moment your life can begin again. And if you are one of the children in this story, please, do not live a life that you will only regret after your parents are gone. Do it before their silence becomes the loudest accusation of all. Before the sighs in the kitchen become a farewell song that no one ever hears. Because, one day, you will realize it. The person you always thought would be there was already gone, a long, long time ago. My name is Eleanor Vance. I didn't leave behind anything big or important, just a small wooden model, a worn-out old diary, and a library that carries the name of my beloved husband. But I believe that if there is just one person, somewhere out there, one person who reads this story and pauses for just a moment, someone who thinks of their own mother, someone who pictures their own father, the one who always took one less piece of chicken from the serving platter, so that their child could have the good part, the one who stayed up late into the night, waiting to hear the sound of the car in the driveway, and then pretended to be asleep when you finally came home. If my story makes you see that person again, truly see them, and you are able to say the words, "Thank you," then all of the pain and all of the silence that I have ever endured will finally have meaning. What you can do right now, "I'm sorry," is fine. "Thank you," is fine too. Just one sentence. That's all it would take. Mom, I finally understand. If I could just hear him say those words, then all the tears I cried on the day I left that house would finally have meant something. They would finally be worth it. Because, you see, when an elderly person has to leave their home, the very last thing they have to leave behind, the one thing they can't pack in a bag, it's the sound of someone calling their name. Please, I pray that one thing at least is never lost forever.